Right. Thank you. Monitoring of the implementation of the TRC recommendations is being done diligently by the National Human Rights Commission. And the government looks to the National Human Rights Commission to actually inform us, because this is such a big program with so many moving elements. It does require very diligent and consistent following up and monitoring. So what I will do is I'll tell you what the last Human Rights Commission's monitoring status of implementation report says. This is from May 2024, and therein it states that 16 recommendations that have been accepted for implementation out of 263 have been completely implemented by the government. 192 are ongoing at various stages, and that 55 are yet to commence. So that is what I would say is the current status of implementation now. Of course, since May 2024, it being today the 7th of February 2025, there's been a lot more activity. We look forward to the 2025 status of implementation report, but as of now, we'd rely on the 2024 figures.
Right. I mean, 192 out of the 263, of course, like you said, 16 of which have been fully implemented through the reports you got from NHRC. Do we know which of these recommendations have been fully implemented?
Absolutely. For example, there was a recommendation under the theme attack on the media, where a study was to be carried out on the criminal code and the criminal offences bill with a view of removing or repealing any provision that unduly restricts freedom of expression and of the press in a democratic society. So just to say that on that point, of course, the Criminal Procedure Bill and the Criminal Offences Bill are both before the National Assembly. This study had been carried out, and they do not contain provisions that are repressive or unduly restrictive to freedom of expression. Now, of course, we take note that there are several more laws, including on the media, on communications, that continue to be reformed, to be reviewed and are to be reformed, but at least on that specific recommendation that has been completed. There's also recommendations on the President's Alternative Treatment Program to basically impose penalties, criminal or otherwise, on healthcare workers that are disclosing the status of people living with HIV. And yes, that's covered under Section 21 of the HIV and AIDS Prevention and Control Act. There is recommendations not to prosecute certain people for SGBV, because they really did not have control over events that happened in the NIA at the time in 2006. And the government in the white paper has decided not to take any legal action against such people. So these are just a few of those recommendations that have been fully implemented. But like I said, a complete list is available from pages 9 to 12 of the NHRC's 2024 Status of Implementation Report.
What are some of the major challenges in this implementation process?
I think it's very important to first discuss the efforts that you're actually doing, right? This is a process that is so important to the Gambia. I think a recent study by a communications firm that was helping us develop a post-TRRC communication strategy says that up to 95% of the population still believe in the work of the TRRC and are supporting this implementation process. So we're grateful for that support, really. And so there is onus on the government, on all that are meant to be implementing these recommendations to work and to work very hard and to demonstrate some tangible results. And, of course, to manage expectations by thereafter asking for patience. So whilst I'm happy to tell you about the challenges now, I hope there's also opportunity to speak of what some of the hard work being done is as well, so that people can really understand that we are working. And so when we ask for patience, it's coming out of asking for grace and not as a brush off, really. The challenges faced are several. Without a doubt, managing expectations that I just mentioned is a challenge, of course, particularly for persons that have been deeply, directly, and personally affected by this process. So we speak of the victim and survivor community. It feels sometimes almost as an affront to ask for patience from them, but we must, because some of these processes are just long-winded and complicated technically, financially, and politically in nature, such as prosecutions. Prosecutions are always difficult. They're always long-term processes. Even an individual domestic, criminal case is such by nature. Of course, when it comes to reparations, there's so much efforts being made to establish the commission and for it to be able to administer its fund as well. But there is the challenge of coming up with the funding as well. Of course, the government is dedicated and will allocate funding to the fund, but it will probably not be enough, and we will have to mobilize those resources. And reparations is typically not an area that donors are happy to fund. So we have financial constraints, we have constraints of managing expectations and bringing people along, how best we do that, which means that we really have to, double up on our communication, on our transparency as well.
Indeed. That leads me to my next question. The ECOWAS heads of state in December 2024, of course, approved this setting up of a special tribunal, of course, to try human rights violations that occurred from July 1994 to January 2017, including the prosecution of former President Jammeh. How soon can we witness the trial of the first case, realistically?
I'm not going to answer that, right? But good try. 69 persons have been recommended for prosecutions by the TRRC, some for domestic crimes and some for crimes that are international in nature. And I think it's very important when we do talk about these prosecutions to understand that we're talking of 69 potential, possibly less, possibly more. It's really to be determined by the special prosecutor upon reviewing the evidence and building case. Their powers are unfettered in that way. So it's not about just one individual and going after that person, although I understand, of course, it brings limelight. What's important really about prosecutions is to ensure that we're doing it to the best of our ability, to very high standards, and really to remember that at the end of the day, it is certainly about victims, those that have been directly affected, but it's also about those people that their liberties may be taken away as well. And that's why that balance must really be struck. So time as well is very important. The longer it takes for us to investigate, in particular, these cases, the more likely it is that the evidence will be difficult to find or would have reduced in its quality. And this is particularly true of SGBB, sexual and gender-based violence and crimes, sexual crimes as well. So time, I know, definitely is very important, and that we speed this up. So I think the better question to ask is, when is the Special Prosecutor's Office going to be up and running? Because that's the heartbeat of this whole process. When we have a special prosecutor, the investigations are ongoing, the cases are being prepared, then it's only then that we will be able to see cases being forwarded to either the Special Criminal Division of our High Court, which I'm excited about, actually, seeing our own local courts, our own local judges, our own local processes trying post-TRRC crimes, or in cases it is an international crime, it being forwarded to the special tribunal. But I can't put a timeline on that. I can say, though, that as a secretariat, we are working with the independent selection panel, and very soon we will see the vacancy notices for the special prosecutor, the deputy special prosecutor, the head of investigations, and the head of admin.
And that prompted me to ask, when can we see it up and running, the special prosecutor's office?
Well, starting with the recruitments, the manner in which the act is drafted, the powers rest with the special prosecutor as an individual. So the special prosecutor must come in place. We're looking at about a 6-month recruitment process. Parallel to this, of course, is that intensive fundraising we must do to ensure that the office has all its operational needs met. And that's not necessarily easy. It's not a regular office. This is an office that must have capacity to investigate very technical and difficult crimes, such as enforced disappearance. So then we look into the issue of forensics, for example, right? So it is still a resource-intensive office that we have to establish here beyond just the recruitment process. But the recruitment process, up until the identification of a special prosecutor, typically should take about 6 months. And the vacancy notice, as I said to you, should be going out about soon.
All right, and still talking about the reparations and, of course, the implementation processes. I know that the National Assembly in December, of course, approved the appointment of 7 members of the Victims Reparation Commission. How soon can we expect to see this commission fully functional, ma'am?
Fully functional, which means them actually issuing reparations, or at what milestone?
Yeah.
Actually receiving reparations.
Yeah.
Very difficult for me to respond to, because it will for me, my milestone is getting the commissioners sworn in, right? Because once the commissioners are sworn in, they are the bosses. They have the power to then determine.
And when can we expect that, for example?
Well, as a secretariat, we have made sure to work on the remuneration of the commissioners. The minister is, of course, involved in this, as the Act specifies. We're in communication with the Office of the President to identify a suitable date for the swearing in as well. So really, I'm sitting here with Ms. Safi Nyang, who's the legal officer that works in the Post-TRRC unit, and I fondly refer to her as co-pilot. But yes, Safi, we're looking forward to doing all of this within the next month.
Right, in the next month, hopefully.
The commissioners to be sworn in. And then, of course, as a secretariat, we will definitely be looking at supporting them to operationalize as quickly as possible. In fact, in that regard, let me inform all that there is a vacancy notice out there for the executive secretary who would head the secretariat of this commission. There's a vacancy notice. If you believe that you are qualified for this position, please do apply.
Right. Let's talk about it, because you've mentioned about timeline. I'm still interested in this, because some Gambians or other people interested in this whole process. I remember somebody asking me, please ask the special advisor, for example, what's your target in terms of implementing at least a greater percentage of the recommendations made by the TRRC?
So quantity over quality?
Not necessarily.
I understand the fixation on quantity. It's the way in which our brain works, and it takes very intentional effort to counter that. I've actually never really thought about that myself, to say, once we implement, I don't know, just giving a figure out there, 50 recommendations, I'm happy. No, those are not the types of indicators I have set for myself. And Instead, I have said, once the structures that are supposed to follow this process are in place, which means that our 4 coordinating mechanisms are running smoothly, very smoothly, meeting as they should, making decisions as they should, and I'm getting a sensation that, okay, we have activated the full coordination mechanism. That is a huge milestone for me, because we have gone from a singular commission doing its work in pretty much not isolation, but with full independence, to now activating an entire government and its machinery, as well as civil society. It takes time for people to understand that actually the implementation process comes back to them, to really fully own that and to be absorbed in that and to make it their everyday, ambition. So that's a huge milestone, to see the meetings happening, to see the decisions being taken, and just to see that whole coordination structure propelling itself. That I think would be a huge milestone. In terms of the recommendations, I'm particularly passionate about those, like I said in another interview, that have to do with individual lives. So definitely to see the Reparations Commission established, to see the reparations fund in place, to see the reparations policy in place, to see the victims database updated. These are all milestone achievements that I look forward to also witnessing. On the flip side of that are perpetrators, alleged or self-confessed as well, to see all the milestones in terms of ensuring that we have as expeditiously as possible a fair and warranting of global discussion criminal accountability process as well. Yes, so I'd be equally excited about seeing the first case before the High Court, which is more likely to happen sooner. But as I would be excited to see the first case being presented before the Special Tribunal. So less about numbers and more about impact, I think.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Finally, ma'am, looking ahead, what steps are being taken, of course, to ensure that the TRRC recommendations lead to lasting reform in addition to implementations?
So the TRC recommendations are a recipe for lasting reforms, right? The recommendations can be categorized into four: reparations, justice and accountability, which I say is about individuals, right? But then there are other two categories that have very little to do with individuals and are actually national dialogues: institutional and legislative reforms, those reforms. Those are not conversations about who did what and when and so on. It's about, is this working for us as a people? Are our lives improving? Are these institutions servicing our needs? Where can we improve, right? And in addition to that, there's another pillar of the recommendations that talks about social cohesion and reconciliation. So let us never reduce the TRC recommendations to just those individualized and more exciting. This was a national dialogue about who we are, what we want for ourselves, and possibly how to get there. It's a roadmap.